So hey there fellow YouTubers, it's Frank Bush here again. In today's video I thought I'd walk through a detailed breakdown of exactly how to do rapid ridge lines. I've done some videos in the past about making rapid ridge lines and stuff, but I haven't really gone through step by step the full build out so people could do it at home themselves. So that's what I plan on doing in this video. So if you want to kind of advance your rope craft skills and you're looking to make a ridge line for when you're out doing bushcraft kind of stuff that's really top shelf and doesn't require any knots and stuff when you're out in the field, you can just set it up in a matter of seconds really rapidly, then stay tuned, yeah? So the first order of business, what I'll do is kind of walk through the different components that I'm going to be using in this build. So I have invested in the past in 1,000 foot of 550 paracord. So I'll just pull that up and kind of give a close-up on the camera, hopefully give the specs on that. But you can see, it's UV resistant, can handle up to 550 pounds, blah, 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 right? So needless to say, I bought one of these a while ago and just use it for doing a lot of my paracord projects. And what I've really done here is just cut off, this is about a 50-foot hank of rope, and I've literally just cut it off. There's nothing that I've done to it other than just melt the ends so that they don't fray. And other than that, it's really just 50 foot of cord at this point in time. I've taken out some of the cutting and melting of the end stages just to save some time, yeah? So what I have here is 4 different lengths of paracord. Each one of these is 18 inches. And like I said, all I've done at this point in time is just melted the ends. And just did that, like I say, all off camera just to save time. I want to really go through the details of the knots and the builds. And then what I have here, this is mason line or chalk line. Now this isn't the stuff that actually has the chalk on it. This is just nylon cable, if you will. And the reason why I use this is I plan on making prusiks that attach on, prusik loops that attach onto my main ridge line. And this is a nylon cordage as well. It's made of the same material that they make the 550 cord out of. And this stuff has about 120, 130 pounds strength to it before it'll break. And when it comes to the prusiks that are going to be kind of putting tension on the tarp when I set up a tarp out in the field, 120, 130 pounds will be ample level of strength for that kind of stuff, yeah? And it just allows me to have really good prusiks that'll grip onto the ridge line as we move through time. And like I say, I'll go through all the full details of that. And then just the same as I did with the 18-inch lengths that I cut of the 550, I cut 3 strands at 18 lengths each, or 18 inches each, and just melted the ends of the chalk line. So what else I have is my little, Leatherman Surge. It's my bushcraft multi-tool of choice, if you will. This is always on my hip, and there's really just 2 key components that I ended up using out of my multi-tool. The first one was my saw component. I should stop for a second, just kind of explain. I have here 2 wooden toggles. Now these wooden toggles I made just out of a stick that came out of the woods. I cleaned the bark off of it, and like I said, I know this one was a bit of a tedious process. It takes like 15 minutes to make these toggles, if you will, so I didn't bother adding that into the camera, but it was really simple. There was a stick in the woods, looked like it was a good hardy stick. I turned around and used my saw and just, cut the stick to the length I needed. And then I also have a little, auger style component that sits on my multi-tool, and most multi-tools have this. Look kind of similar to that. Hopefully the camera's picking that up on, good angle, if you will. And in order to drill these holes into these pieces of wood, simply just kind of whittled it out, if you will, with a little auger bit thing. And all the way to the point that it was clean through and it was big enough to push the paracord through, yeah? And then I just kind of cleaned it up a little bit so that the cord could slide easy, so kind of cleaned up around the outside edges a bit. I still need to do a bit of that. Should do a bit of chamfing on the edges of there too, but it's a toggle. I'm not overly concerned. But like I said, I didn't bother recording all of that because it's kind of a tedious process and there's not much to show on camera. And hopefully the description of what I've done here is pretty self-explanatory, yeah? So needless to say, that's how I got my kind of toggle pieces to begin with, and that's really the sum of all I needed the multi-tool for, was just to make these toggles. And like I say, if you're in an area with twigs, as you can see, they're about the diameter of my pinky or so. And then to give you an idea of the size, they're a little bit smaller than my pinky, but they could easily be the same size as my pinky, and they're about the same diameter around, yeah? And that gives you an idea of kind of the size of the wood I'm working with. You could go with a little bit larger than these. I wouldn't go too huge, or, you know, it can make life more difficult later on, but that gives you a rough idea of the size of the things I'm working with, yeah? So either way, like I say, we've got the basic kind of fundamental components here. Let's move on with doing the build, yeah? All right, so the very first step that I'm going to do, like I say, I just bundled up this hank of rope. If you watch previous videos of mine, I show how to kind of do rapid deploy bundles and that kind of stuff, and I'll probably walk through that in this video too, but either way, I'm just going to take the line end that kind of would feed out of the bundle, if you will. I'm just going to pull that out a bit, and it's, like I said, all quick release, so just to give me a bit of line to work with, yeah? Now, the first order of business I'm going to do with this line is I'm going to turn around and slide a toggle onto this line. And I'm just going to feed the paracord right in through and let that just sit freely on the line so it's movable. You know, I'm not tying any knots or anything else in it at this point, yeah? And now on the end, I'm going to want to make an eye in the line, if you will, a little loop in the end of the line. And when it comes to the size of that loop, I'm going to want to make that to be roughly about as big as the length is of the toggles. And my toggles are both pretty well the same size, yeah? So, you know, within reason, the knot's going to take up a bit of the cordage. So I'll give that a bit of slack. And now all I'm going to do when it comes to this now is I'm going to turn around and kind of wrap it around my finger while I'm holding both ends here, right? I'm going to just kind of wrap that around my finger and feed that through both holes. Now this is just the loop on the end of the line that I like to use. Lots of people like to use bowlines and other things like that, you know, and it's pretty flexible when it comes to, there's a few different knots that you can use, and I'm just going to check that now. Yeah, it seems to be a bit tighter. So I definitely don't want it to be too much where it's hard for the toggle to feed through. So I'm just going to loosen that off a bit, open it out, give myself a bit more room. Like I say, and easy enough to adjust before you go tightening down everything and kind of locking everything in place. You know, muddle about with this kind of stuff a little bit just to make sure that you're kind of at the right point. Yeah, that should be better. And now the thinking really is, I just want to tighten that knot down and make sure that, you know, that knot's good and on the line. Now that's never going anywhere. That's really kind of my end that's going to wrap around the tree. And it looks like the toggle, you know, can fit through there within reason. It's a fairly snug fit, but it'll fit. So that's always good. That's exactly the kind of size I want. So all I'm going to do now is just snip off this little bit of cordage and clean up that end so I don't have any kind of loose ends. But first order business that I'm going to do is just use my pliers and kind of pull it out on all the different ways it'll pull. Make sure that my line's on there good and tight. I want that knot to be rock solid. I mean, I've never had these knots give or slip in any way or any form. So, you know, it's good in that regard. But that's, generally speaking, the thinking that I want to do is my first couple of kind of knots on the line, if you will. And I'll just cut just kind of cut off that extra bit. And really, if I adjusted my knot more cleanly than I have, I wouldn't have even had to cut that off, but such is life, right? I made this ridgeline a little bit longer. Normally I run my ridgelines about 30 to 35 feet, and this one's going to be closer to 50 feet because I want to have it where, you know, any length in between the trees isn't going to be an issue. So really, this is the first step now. Like I say, And we've got it to the point where all we've got now is a clean loop sitting on the line and a toggle that can float freely on the paracord, yeah? So now I'll switch camera angles and kick over to the next step. All right, so now the next step in the build, like I say, I've just got that lead line. I've kind of set off to the side now. Now, the next step of the build, I really need to turn around and make myself a bunch of loops out of all these cords that I've cut to length now. And like I said, these were all cut to 18 inches. And generally speaking, what I do is, maybe I'll use the darker one to stand out on the camera a bit better. Yeah, that'll probably be better. So now, when it comes to turning these into a loop, in fact, let me just shift my camera angle a bit, see if I can kind of give myself a bit of room to work with here. Just 2 seconds. Sorry about that, I should have done that already, but... So, needless to say, I've got this, 18-inch piece of cordage. Now, in order to turn this into a loop that I'm going to be using to make prusik loops as we move through time, the thinking really is, I'm going to take the two ends now, make sure I'm good and in the camera here. I'm going to take the two ends now, and now the first end I'm just going to lay over top, if you will. I'm going to wrap it around. I'm going to go, in fact, I'll just do that. I'm going to go over top and then under and through the hole. I know I got big mitts, so sometimes it doesn't get on the camera well. But needless to say, that'll be the first knot. Now, I simply just turn this around, and I'm going to do the same kind of thing. Now, this little knot now can slide on that line, easy enough. So I'll just kind of slide it a bit to give myself a bit of room. But the thinking really now is I'm going to do the exact same thing on this direction, where I'm going to take the rope, I'm going to come over the top, I'm going to come through, and then I'm just going to come over the top of that loop and then out through the hole of it. Hopefully the camera catches that with justice. And I want to have these knots where I don't want to have a lot of the extra where the end has been kind of melted and soldered shut, if you will. I don't really want to have a lot of that be spare. And then, needless to say, that's pretty well it now of, I'll just adjust that knot to make it that there isn't much sitting on the edge. And now you simply just kind of pull these two now, and they come together as such. So I'll flip it and kind of show you and roll it in my hand. Hopefully the camera's catching this well, to show you what this knot should look like. And if it doesn't look the same as what I'm showing, then you're going to have to redo the knot. You haven't done it properly. But you should see kind of two bands sitting here, kind of right side by each with each other. And then on the other side, you should see it look like that. So now, as I apply tension, that won't go anywhere. That's on there now, good and solid. Like I said, this is called a fisherman's knot. If I wanted to, I can still grab those two little nubs and pull them apart. And I can turn it into an adjustable sized loop that way, but it won't hold, to whatever size it is. It's just good if you wanted to make, say, a bracelet or something like that, right? And then you could just tighten down the little fisherman's knots. That's not obviously what we're doing in this scenario, but just to show you, right, as a little side note. So needless to say, kind of set those knots against each other, and now this fisherman's knot has created a nice loop that I can work with as we move through time. So now I have to do that to the other 7 strands of cordage that I have here, the 3 remaining paracord and the 3 remaining mason line, and do them all exactly as I just showed. So I'll stop, cut cameras, go off and tie those knots, and then come back when I have all my loops assembled, yes? Okay, so it's been about another 2-3 minutes now, and I've got all my loops assembled now. As you can see, I've just tied fisherman's knots into each of these different pieces of cordage, and it really just gives me sets of loops, yeah? So fairly straightforward, fairly elementary. And like I said, I've got 4 of the 550 paracords, and I've got 3 of the mason line loops now done up. So now the next step will be, let's hook those onto the Ridgeline and start to advance it out further, yeah? Okay, so now all I'm going to do now is kind of set up my Ridgeline just in a short scale in front of the camera here, where I can apply some tension to the line. So I've got my solar generator that I built, or I don't know if I built this one out in previous videos, but it's got a handle on the top. I'm just going to use that as a brace point to connect onto. And the thinking really is, I just want to have tension being applied to this line. So hopefully, I might have to adjust my camera angle a bit, but I'm just going to apply some tension to this line because the next knots that I go to set up here, it's easier to just kind of have tension on the line, yeah? So let me just see if the camera's going to give that justice or not. Yeah, that should be all right. Maybe I'll adjust you guys forward a little bit. There we go. So now this is really just kind of temporary setup between two objects that I have in my work area that I'm working in here, just to kind of, like I say, give tension to the line. Now the thinking really is, I'm going to take these mason loops that I've created now, and I want to attach them as prusiks onto the line. And if you're kind of curious, the toggle is right here on the Ridgeline. Like I said, I've just hooked it onto the handle of my solar generator to give tension, but I'm just now a couple inches down, and these prusiks will move freely on the line. So, but hopefully that just kind of gives you a bit of bearing to, you know, where this is happening on the Ridgeline. It's needless to say, I've just got these loops of cordage now. I'm going to turn around and wrap them 3 times around the line, on the insides, if you will. And now I'm going to just pull out now, see if I can show that justifiably. Now I'm just going to kind of apply tension, and I don't want the line order to kind of go astray, but I want to have these loops all just kind of feed into the middle. And you'll see in a second a clean prusik that appears out of the ether, if you will. And you want to make sure that your lines are kind of set. I'll do a real close-up of this so you guys can see. But it just kind of cinches on now, where I've done 3 loops to the inside. But now this prusik loop is strapped onto the Ridgeline. And like I say, I'll kind of loosen back here and just show you a real close-up of that so you guys can see what that should look like. So now on the one side, you should see it. Let's see if I'm cleanly getting that. It should look as such, where you see 6 loops, none of them overlapping each other. They should all sit flat against each other. And then the line should run across the bottom, yeah? And I'll just flip that over now and show you kind of this side. And it'll be the same now again. So that allows me to attach, like I say, it allows me to attach a prusik onto the line. And what the prusiks really do is they make it that I can slide them when there's no tension on the line. I can slide them really easily back and forth on the line. But as soon as I turn around and apply tension to the line, it'll lock and hold and kind of catch that line on the main Ridgeline, so it won't go anywhere. It gives me this kind of locking point, if you will. And prusiks, you know, they're really common in bushcraft. If you've done bushcraft or any of that kind of, you know, woodcraft, bushcraft kind of stuff in the past, prusiks are really part and parcel with doing a lot of bushcraft stuff. So needless to say, I've attached on one. Now the thinking really is, I'm just going to turn around and attach on these other 2, and I'm just going to do them right to the left of this prusik. So I won't bother going through doing the full knots again. I'll just hook them onto the line so you guys can see what that looks like, yeah? Alright, so it's been about another minute or 2 here. I've now hooked on all 3 prusiks onto the line, yeah? And you can see they're all kind of independent and clean. Hopefully I'll maybe kind of fiddle with the camera a bit, but you should have this kind of look and feel for the prusiks. They should really sit nice and flat and clean onto the lines, yeah? There shouldn't be any kind of overlapping, especially up in these areas. It should all look clean. These lines should sit side by each with each other really cleanly, with the loop actually coming through the center. So, you know, if you see anything other than that, pull it off and reset it on. These are really simple knots. They don't take a lot to them. But either way, I now have these 3 prusiks hooked onto the line, and I'm ready to move on to my next stage, yeah? And as a one kind of side comment, you'll notice, let me just tension up this ridgeline to kind of keep my hands free from things so I can do the example. So you'll notice though, when I did these loops on there, the fisherman's knot was off-centered. It's not sitting right down on the end. When I hook on these prusik loops, I intentionally kind of set them off to the side so that when other lines set onto them, they're not restricted by that fisherman's knot in any way. Just a little kind of side note, if you will. And these are, like I say, prusik loops are really easy to put on the line. There's not much to them. If you do find that they fumble up in any way, shape, or form, it's easy enough to just pull them off and reattach them, yeah? But either way, we'll move on to the next step of the build-out. Okay, so now, with the next step of this process, I'm going to want to attach cordage carabiners onto these. So typically, when it comes to these prusiks, you can feed them through the eye grommets, you know, on the tarps and that kind of stuff, and just stick a stick through it and turn around and lash it on, and you're off to the races and life is good. But quite often, or occasionally I should say, depending on the terrain you're in, you'll end up finding scenarios where you might not be able to find good little strong, stout little sticks that you can use as toggles to kind of strap on to your prusiks. So by using cordage carabiners, it allows you to solve that problem and still be able to tie off to your tarps and that kind of stuff without issue, yeah? So the thinking really is, I've got this loop now of paracord, and what I'm going to do is kind of pull it and find where the halfway point is, and I'll show you 2 different ways you can do this. So the first way, I'm going to turn around and make a lark's head knot. So I'm going to kind of fold this over on itself, and then I'm going to want to pinch and just kind of grab the 2 inner strands and pull them, and it forms a little loop. Hopefully the camera's getting that all right. So it gives me like a little pocket I can work with. And what this allows is that fisherman's knot now, that's on the other end, I can feed that directly through that loop and just set it on and then tighten it. And what that allows me to now have is like a carabiner made out of paracord. So I can ditch the whole concept of having carabiners. I don't really use them ever in my bushcraft stuff, but it allows you to ditch them entirely and still have good, strong carabiner capabilities. Now, I prefer this method with the lark's head, but there's another method you can do, and I'll show you that here, where you turn around and have the knot end now. I'm going to take the other end of this loop. I'm going to feed it through as such, and then I can wrap it over top of that knot and kind of hook around that knot, and I can set things on that way as well. And that allows, like I said, I can apply ample amounts of pressure, and now you've got a doubled up cable. In either scenario, you get kind of this doubled up cordage, you know, capability. But in either scenario, it acts like a carabiner where that's now locked. It's not going anywhere. In order for this to become free, you can simply pop that back off the top and you're off, yeah? So it's really elementary. You know, you can go either way in these scenarios. Like I say, I prefer going with the lark's head version, you know, which is where I kind of created on this end. And then just because what's going to end up happening now is each one of these prusik loops that we've set onto the line, I'm just going to feed my fisherman's knot through, and I'm just going to hook that right into the lark's head knot and tighten it up. And now I've got these kind of cordage carabiners strapped right on to my prusik loops. So if I want to hook onto a tarp, I can simply loosen these off, you know, feed this through the grommet or the tie out of the tarp, you know, put that onto the line, feed them through, tighten them up. And then there's no real knots per se when I'm out in the field. It allows me to connect, you know, without having to use any toggles for the, you know, putting up the tarp and that kind of stuff. So needless to say, that's the thinking though, really, is I've got these little cordage carabiners, if you will, that I've attached onto the prusiks. And they're good in the regards of, if these prusiks ever break or give, these can instantly become spares. And they're just already right on your Ridgeline. They're right in the kit and ready to go. So the thinking really is, I'm going to do the same thing now when it comes to the other two, and just attach on, like I say, attach on some additional cordage carabiners to each one of these prusiks. And they're really just there to be a replace of toggles. You know, you don't really need to have the toggles out there. And now that's on there. It's not going anywhere. On to the next. And I'll do this just the same for continuity's sake, where I simply just feed that right through the prusik, push my fisherman's knot through that little lark's head knot that I create, and set that on. And the good part is, all of this stuff you can take on or put off, or, you know, all that kind of stuff with ease, right? There's not much to it in that regard. But one way or the other now, we've got the 3 cordage carabiners attached to our prusiks, and our prusiks are able to slide on the line. So we'll move on to the next step now, yeah? All right, well, I actually had a change of heart of how I was going to move forward with the next step of this. So needless to say, I'm going to probably create one more prusik loop out of the 550 cord. But I don't know, I'll stop and think about how there's a lot of different ways you can kind of do these things when it comes to options. So I'm just being indecisive within my own head, really, more than anything. But needless to say, the next step, I've got those, so just so you're aware, those 3 prusiks that had the cordage carabiner strapped on them. I've got those on the line. I'm just going to slide them up near the wooden toggle that we attached earlier in the video. And that way they're kind of out of the way, yeah? And I'll turn around and the exact same thing. I'm just going to hook on a prusik with the 550 cord now. I'll try to catch this on camera as best I can. And I've got big mitts, so they kind of get in the way, but you just wrap that around 3 times, if you will. And then you kind of keep it to the outside, but pull down on the inside and just kind of bring everything together. I'm really trying to do this the best I can to give you the camera angles of how it's going to look as you're forming this knot, if you will. But that's really kind of the thinking right there. That's kind of how it starts to come together and look when you're doing it with the 550 cord. Now, 550 cord, the grip here isn't, you know, a lot of people claim the grip there isn't really as good as it is when you're using a smaller diameter cordage like I am with the Mason line. And if you feel like that's the case and that this knot is slipping, it's easy enough to just kind of open it up, bring it around, and give it one more pass through. So instead of just going 3 times around, you go 4. And I've found that anytime I've had slippage on the line, you know, if it's really wet and it's cold out in the field and you are running into a situation where a prusik loop is wanting to slip when you're applying tension, I find, generally speaking, just adding on that 1 extra loop round will create the reality where that'll never slip. You know, when you're up to 4 round, that thing will hold on and it's ironclad. It just locks on and you can still move it and everything just the same as you could before. But one way or the other, that is on to the line solid. So needless to say, I'll just leave that one at the 4 so there is no sticking in the future for me. But you can see, really simple knot. Like I say, there's tons of YouTube tutorials on how to make prusiks, and this one's just really modified by having the additional, loop onto it. But one way or the other, I'm just going to stop for 2 seconds and think about exactly how I want to approach the next step of, like I say, I'll turn around and whip off another prusik loop because I'll need 2 of them, I think, and how I'm going to move forward with this next step. And I'll cut a piece of 18-inch paracord and get it ready the same as I showed earlier in the video with the fisherman's knots and that kind of thing, and then I'll cut back, yeah? All right, so like I say, I've got another 18-inch piece of paracord, and I'm going to take that last toggle. Sorry, I was just debating on how I was going to attach the toggle on, and I've decided to hardline it right into it. So needless to say, I'm going to take this 18-inch piece of paracord here. I'm going to feed it right through the toggle hole. And it's a snug fit, but either way, that's good. And I'm going to turn around and just do a fisherman's knot and tie that right onto this toggle, right into the loop. So it's always part of the loop, yeah? And I'll just, like I say, wrap that around, up and through. Flip it over the other way. Exact same thing, opposite direction. Gonna come over the line, under and around, over and through the loop. And it's really, you want the end bits of cordage to be facing kind of away, if you will. It's a good sign you've done the knots the right way. Because you can go left over right or right over left and that kind of stuff, right? So needless to say, kind of just pull those tight. And I can see the 2 are sitting against each other. Lets me know the knot's all good. I'll just give it a good pull. And now that's on there. And that toggle's locked on there without issue now, right? So now I'll slide the toggle right up near the knot itself now. And I'm going to, let me just check my camera angles. Yeah, hold on. Maybe I should adjust my channel. I'll adjust the camera angles and then hook this part on, yeah. It's always the toss-up between wanting to show you guys the close-ups of exactly how these knots are done and everything, and wanting to have enough room to work in, if you will. But needless to say, I'm just going to set it on where, like I say, I've put the toggle right up near the knot. I'm going to set that on the line and wrap the toggle around and around and around one more time. And make sure I'm taking that knot with me. I'll just slide that other prusik out of the way a bit. And now, dress up that prusik knot so that it looks okay. And the loop that's going to kind of lock everything always has to go to the outside. So if you're kind of getting frustrated to which way is this cord going and everything else, that's the nature of how things are going to flow, if you will. And I always find that these get to be a bit of a mess too. So if you end up getting frustrated when dealing with prusiks, you're not alone. It's just the nature of how the cordage sits on itself sometimes. It doesn't always like to lay the flattest. But such is life. It's easy enough to straighten out. Only takes a minute, right? And should be something similar to there. I'll dress it up a little further, but it gives you an idea now. So now I've got this toggle hard-lined right into the prusik, and this will become a key component later on when it comes to being able to rapidly strap onto trees. Now the build here is pretty well done now. The only thing I have left to do is down at the far end of the line. So let me just kind of slide these both this way. Like I say, I'll make sure all these knots are dressed up. I do all the time when I'm out in the field too, right? It's a never-ending battle when it comes to doing these things to make sure that your knots are sitting flat and everything else. But you know, as long as they're not slipping on the line when you're using them, it's normally a mood point, if you will. And in fact, I'm just going to pop that fourth one back out. And I had a change of heart and just take it back down to being a regular prusik. It just looks cleaner. You know, when I'm out in the field, I don't really care about, you know, how clean things look. It's just when I go to pull on this thing, does it bite under the line or not, right? The proof is in the pudding when you're out in the field doing stuff. So, but needless to say, that's going to be the heart of it now when it comes to setting up these different Ridgeline components, if you will. So the only thing left, I'll shift camera angles here and just show the one last knot that needs to kind of be set on this whole show, if you will. And then we'll, as moving forward scenes, we'll look at setting this out in the field. So now on the bundle end now, because like I said, we've just been kind of setting up all the components now so that they're ready to go, right? But on the bundle end now, on the other end of the line, and we haven't done anything down on this end at all yet, all I simply have to do here is put a little overhand knot. And that's it. I'm going to leave this, and this is really a stopper knot. Later on in time, when the Ridgeline is fully set out, just putting on that little knot allows it that all those prusiks and stuff we set on the line, you know, if we're moving things around the line, there's no chance of those prusiks sliding off the end of the line, if you will. This is really just a stopper knot to stop that from happening. You know, really elementary. But one way or the other, we're now to the point where this Ridgeline is fully completed, and as the next scenes in the video, like I say, I'll show this being set up between two trees and how easy it really is, yeah? Okay, so at this point now, like I said, the Ridgeline is completed. Like I say, I'll jump out in the yard or out in the, take a trip out in the backcountry, set this up out in the forest somewhere. But either way, this is the order now in which you should see things. You've got a loop sitting on the end. You've got a toggle that's just floating on that line freely. We've got the 3 prusiks that have the cordage carabiners attached. Then we've got this prusik with the toggle inlined on it. And we've got another prusik now on the line. And now I've just bundled up my hank of rope so that can be quick release. Now you notice all my gear is going to be kind of sitting up right at the beginning, so I can control all my knots and how the flow of things are going to go when I go to connect between two trees with ease. Then you'll see that tomorrow when we go to wrap this video up. But this is exactly what things should look like at this point in time. If you're kind of following along and building it out yourself, you should have the same kind of construct now, where like I say, at the loop, the toggle, you've got 3 prusiks that are feeding off to the cordage carabiners. Then you've got the prusik with the toggle and another prusik on the line. And then it just feeds off to your quick deploy hank, yeah? All right, fellow YouTubers. So I'm just out at one of my local parks in the area. Brought along a little tarp to help show the example. And I've got the Ridgeline that I built. And now I'm gonna, first off, I'm gonna show you from this tree to this tree how fast you can actually set up this Ridgeline to give you an idea of how rapid it truly is. And then I'll stop and go back and we'll walk through each one of the different connection points and how they work, yeah? So I'm up and it's rigid now. Tarp's now hooked on the 2 points. My stick tent peg choice wasn't necessarily the best. You can see. Like I say, you can see that was all real time, right? The speed to set this up is really quite rapid, and the fact that there was no knots needed, you know, that you can set this up with adjustable gear, that because of the length of the ridgeline, I potentially could end up going between trees that were 20 foot apart or trees that were 50 foot apart. And because of these types of toggles that I'm using, the diameter of the trees is really a moot point. I can go around smaller trees or larger trees, obviously to the length of the cordage that I'm working with for my ridgeline. But this is about a 50-foot ridgeline. It's a little longer than what I would normally work with, but it gives you an idea of the flexibility of the distance between the trees is pretty well relevant, you know, within reason, and the diameter of the trees the same. And because you don't have to tie any knots or anything, this makes this a really flexible setup. You know, I recommend at least trying this out. You know, it takes an hour or two to go through the build of making this ridgeline and all that kind of happiness, but it's invaluable when you're out in the field. Like I say, when your hands are cold and the rain's beating down and you don't have the dexterity within your fingers to really do that fine detailed knot work that you want to do, this is a great alternative to being able to achieve all the same results you're looking at, but not having to rely on knots in your fingers. And you know, when these things get wet and it's cold and everything else, knots can get tricky when you're out in the field. If your hands are weak and the knot's full of a bunch of water and there's tension on it and that kind of thing, you know, you want to try to minimize as much of that as you possibly can. You know, a lot of people refer to it as roughing it when you're out in the woods. In my perspective, you don't want to be roughing it. You want to be trying to smooth it, if you will, as rapidly as possible. And having technology like this and the ability and skills to do things like this can make your stay when you're out in the wilderness that much easier. All right, so like I say, I'm going to try to get this as close and detailed as possible. So on this ridgeline, the very first things we did, I'll just pull out a bit of this to give me a bit of length. So one of the very first things we did was hook on the loop and the wooden toggle. Yeah, so I'm just going to shift the rest of the gear down a little bit so that I've got a bit of room to work with. Now all I'm going to do is take this loop, I'm going to wrap it around the tree. Make sure I'm still in camera here. I'm going to wrap it around this tree. And now this toggle that exists here, I'm going to pinch both pieces of the cordage coming out both sides of that toggle. And I'm just going to take this loop, I'm going to hook it on to that toggle, and then against the tip of the loop itself, I'm just going to push that, and I'm going to lock that against the tree. And this is cinched on there now. It's like a one-way cinch, if you will, where that's not going anywhere. And I can make that right flush to the tree. I can make it nice and tight. You can see there's a lot of tension on there. So it makes it really easy to kind of lock and brace to a tree, yeah? And when it comes to popping this off now, if I turn around and just take this toggle and break it a bit, it loosens right here and allows me to just pop the toggle off, and I can come off the tree with ease. So like I say, simply just pinch both sides of the cordage, both sides of the toggle on the cordage, and then sit against that tree and set. And I'll see if I can get any closer with this. Like I say, it's a little bit tricky, but hopefully you can see that now, where the loop that's coming through kind of puts a bend in this cordage and locks it on the toggle, and that's how you're getting this cinching strength. So now the way that this tensioner works really is, the way this tensioner works really is I can one-way cinch that as tight as I want it to go. And I'll show in a future video of ways to use this similar setup to kind of strap gear to your bag and that kind of stuff. But either way, now the remaining components that sit on this line are the 3 prusik loops that have the cordage carabiners on them. I'm just going to leave those kind of here and out of the way now. And now I've got the 2 prusiks that have, one of them has a toggle on it. These, as I'm walking, I'm just going to slide these down the line, because as you can see, they can kind of slide freely on the line here. I'm going to just slide those with me as I take my hanked bundle and walk towards the other tree, yeah? So now I'll just shift camera angles and show you the connection on the other side. Okay, so I'll try to do this as elegantly as I can. But the thinking really is, I'm just, like I say, just pulling these 2 prusiks down the line as I go. And just kind of shifting them along, yeah? As I get to this tree now this bundle is going to start to become loose. If I want, I can kind of cinch it a bit tighter just to keep tension on it. It's not really critical though. So, but needless to say, as I come to this point, I'm going to leave the prusik. Just make sure that the camera is catching that. Yeah, it should be okay. So I'm going to leave the prusik that has the toggle on it sitting on this side of the tree, and the other prusik that doesn't have one, I'm simply just going to bring that around and back to this side. And as I do that, it gives me an ease to just hook that toggle right into the loop. And now I'm set here. All I have to do is slide this prusik to apply tension. I can reset that bundle with ease. But if I see that I'm kind of moving a bit too far away from the tree, simply just tighten up this portion so I can stay close to this tree as much as I want. I can adjust it however I want with it being a little loose, and just by kind of pulling out that prusik, it allows me to lock and make this as tense as I want it to be. And I can go both ways. I can apply it here, or I can apply it on the side with the loop. And now that's on there. That's a really tight ridge line. It's not going anywhere, yeah? And when it comes to the 3 mason line prusiks that I have on there with cordage carabiners, I'll show that as part of the next step, yeah? So now with the prusik carabiners, like I say, they just float along the line. I'm going to use the one that's on the outside on my left, your right, as one tie-out point to a tarp. I'm going to use the 3rd one that's on that line as being the tie-out point to the other corner of the tarp, and I'm going to leave this line in the middle so I can hang gear or that kind of thing on. So I'll just kind of space these out a bit. I'm just going to come out to the corner point now, and the cordage carabiners that I've put onto these lines, now just going to pop those open. I'm going to slide the little loop that I have through the tie-out point on the tarp. I'm going to just hook those carabiners back on and lock that to this point. And now I'm locked on, and I can slide and adjust this prusik wherever I want it to be, but the tarp is securely, tied out, if you will, to this point. So I'll do a close-up of that again to show you the full detail of it, and then I'll go off and do the other corner, yeah? So now, like I say, I'll just disconnect this and kind of show it again now. So I've got this cordage carabiner, got the knot on the end. I'm simply just going to feed that through the loop of the prusik. And I showed that the lark's head knot in previous examples, but in this time I'll just do it this way, where I'm feeding the loop at the end of where I put a bite in it back through itself, and then kind of come over the top, pull it out a bit, and just tighten it up. And now that cordage carabiner is locked on there. So hopefully that gave that justice. But one way or the other, I'm cinched on. This thing's not going anywhere. I can apply a lot of tension onto this point without issue. And I didn't have to worry about having any type of wood off the land or any of that business, yeah? So I'll kind of pan back and hook on the other side to show you kind of how quickly these things can go, yeah? So now you can see, I simply take the other corner tie-out point that I have on my tarp. You can bring this over to the soft shackle if there's not enough room or any of that business. It's easy enough to just adjust at this point. And pop that so it's loose, feed it through. And hook it back on. And as simple as that. I'm strapped on. It's locked, it's not going anywhere. Now I can just pull out these prusiks and apply tension. Now I've locked these 2 points, and that's on there really tight. You know, it's not definitely not going anywhere. I've got a good tight point here. I could easily turn around and guy off this onto the center point. I don't feel it's necessary. It's better off to use this to hang a lantern or that kind of thing, yeah? And now when it comes to setting up the 2 back points, I'll just grab 2 sticks and set those out so you can see kind of how quickly you can set this tarp setup up as a basic kind of lean-to, if you will, yeah? Okay, my focus is mainly on just doing a half-decent ridgeline more than anything else. But just to show you, I'll grab some sticks of, I pull out the one corner, bring it out nice and square on the angle here and square to that point, and stick a spike in the earth, if you will. And I'm on that point, and then the same on the other. Now I could rapidly, I know I'm going off camera, I'm sorry people, just the nature of the size of these tarps and my poor camera work, but as you can see, in a matter of seconds I've now got a covered area set up, yeah? And give me a fairly wide footprint to get in and out of the rain. I'll shift this to a better angle here, hold on. So hopefully this angle gives it a bit better justice, if you will. But as you can see, fairly wide footprinting underneath here where I can be in out of the weather. I've got a dry patch that I can kind of stay out of the conditions in, if you will, right? All right, well, I thought I'd just stop and show, to be kind of a purist in things, given the fact that I'm demoing in this Ridgeline set. So like I say, this is all the gear, the toggles and all that kind of stuff. I've just pushed those all down to the end with the loop on it and the toggle, yeah? So all I'm gonna do now is kind of put that line through my middle finger and the ring finger in the space in between. I'm going to hook over my thumb, come around the pinky, and then I'm going to do figure eights. And this is really how you set up a nice clean bundle when you want to do a rapid release later on in time. When I get to the point, let's see how much line I got left. Yeah, we're getting down to the last couple feet now. Make sure I'm still in camera, all right? So you can see though, you just continue doing that. Now I'm down to the last couple feet of cordage on my line. I'm just gonna pop my pinky and thumb. I'm just gonna kind of hold this, pop my pinky and thumb out, squeeze the bundle together, and then I'm gonna wrap the last bit of line around this way. And you can do this fairly tight if you want to kind of secure things. Now, generally speaking, some people put a clove hitch in here. I don't like doing that because I just know I'm just going to end up pulling it back off anyways. I normally just kind of bring it around once, pull the stopper knot through, and just cinch that tight. And that tends to be good enough to hold it now. And when it comes to, releasing this now, as I pull on this lead line, it's just going to pull straight out of the bundle without getting tangled up into itself, yeah? And there was no knots really involved here. you know, when it comes to packing away the tarp. Not a big deal. Takes a few seconds. Just pile that back into the bag. And you can see though, in a matter of minutes, you can go from having your gear sitting kind of in bundles in your bag to having a full shelter up and running. And you know, if you're in cold weather and that kind of stuff, sometimes your finger dexterity doesn't work as good because of the cold temperatures and that. And when it comes to this rapid Ridgeline, it's really good in that regard of not having to tie any knots. You know, if you're out and it's, you know, 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and I don't know what that is, 10 degrees below Celsius, and it's cold, you're not going to have the same dexterity of your fingers as your, if it's a, you know, 70 degree, you know, Fahrenheit, 20 degrees Celsius day. It's just not the way it is when you're out in the field, right? That reality just isn't the case. So doing things like this allows it where, of course I'm having to go with it, right? Every time you're doing a video. But needless to say, you're not going to have the same kind of finger dexterity that you would, you know, in a nice warm comfortable day when everything's dry and blah blah blah. And you still want to have it where you're wanting to set up that shelter quick, especially in the cold, you know, wet weather and that kind of stuff. Even if you don't have the hand dexterity, you know, your fingers aren't quite as, you know, good at doing the knots and stuff. As you can see, oh, I'm pretty well there. So like I say, if you're interested in this type of content, thanks for watching, yeah, and stay tuned. Cheers.